And now, the survival show which once survived the apocalypse with just a hula dancer and a hot air balloon, Pinky. In this episode, we sit down with Gary of Guns Over Texas Radio Podcast. We're going to discuss what the future may hold. Black Lives Matter, All Lives Matter, Blue Lives Matter, and what may be one of the most serious disconnects of our generation. Howdy, and welcome back to In the Rabbit Holes Urban Survival Podcast. This is episode number 177, season 6. I'm your host, Aaron, and you are back in the rabbit hole, safe and sound. Two quick notes before we dive in today. First, this episode is going to be commercial-free for easy sharing, so, please share it. Next up, this episode is marked explicit. Now, often the episodes are marked explicit just to scare people off, honestly. But this episode really is going to drop some F-bombs. And really, this is the kind of episode which calls for them. So with that, strap in, kiddies. Here we go. Gary, welcome back to In the Rabbit Hole, dude.
Thank you, sir.
You are one of my favorite human beings on this planet, and I know we actually don't know each other all that well, but every time I'm around you, every time we talk, I'm like, this is a person I wish I had, just infinite amounts of time to just sit and bullshit about the what the fucks, and that's kind of what this episode's going to be about, and it being the season 6 kickoff here, let's have some fun with it.
Yeah.
And as we were talking a little bit before we started recording here today, we're going to talk a little bit about the really awful MTV article. I think the name of it was The Really, Really, Really Racist History of Gun Control.
Right, yeah.
Which was
I remember just being floored that they even wrote that.
Yeah, and it was, so I guess from the title alone, it seems like I saw that title and I was like, oh wow, MTV wrote this? And then you read the article and it is so meandering and so bizarre and so, I guess it is well written in the sense that I don't think most people see it. I guess if you're on the bias that guns are bad, right, you don't see the bias in there, but you're looking at it and there's so many little details thrown in that actually have no bearing on what they're discussing that you're like, oh, well, this is obviously like an anti-gun thing.
Right.
Veiled in just trying to talk about the racist history of gun control. So I guess for you, where did that article land for you? Like where?
There's some honest truth to that article, yet it, like you said, it meanders and doesn't really get it. It still somehow tries to justify gun control, I guess, to me. And there is a racist history of gun control. There's no question of that. Anyone who's really studied U.S. history and honestly studied U.S. history and not just the stuff that's in our schools, but done an honest assessment of history and read stuff that's in the library because it's not on the internet, will find that yes, there was racist application of gun laws. And in fact, you can even look at Texas law as a really good example because you can almost see that laws were written to address a specific ethnicity at one point in time or another.
Yeah, it's the same thing with marriage laws.
Yeah, marriage laws or knife laws or anything. So there's always been a tinge of racism in a lot of laws that were written, and we can even come into modern times now. And it may be a controversial, theory. But I firmly believe that, with the end of Jim Crow, one of the interesting things that we suddenly started doing was mass incarceration for drug offenses. I honestly think that the war on drugs is to a degree racist in nature. And there may not be an overt intent there, but, let's face it, we've consistent. In fact, actually, I believe there was a interview where I think it was part of Nixon's administration admitted, oh yeah, we pushed the war on drugs to marginalize folks to retain power. There is that, but I don't spend my days going racist this, racist that. I've
right.
got bigger things to worry about.
Right.
I mean, there's plenty of bad stuff out there. To say that racism doesn't exist, you just would have to be an idiot to say that. But but it's not something that rules my life. But yeah, the article with MTV definitely, it just kind of, like you said, it just meandered and wandered about around a bit. It did hit on some truthful points, but at the end of the day, I was still shocked that they even admitted to any of that, and that part was kind of interesting.
As I was reading the article, I thought it was funny because it went so far out. It was like taking a really long road home to come back to saying guns are bad.
Right.
That I was like, the funny thing is, if you read it with a pro-gun bias and leave out the parts where it's obvious that they've just including certain pieces that have nothing to do with the story, they're only trying to further the agenda of the NRA is bad, guns are bad,
Right.
that it's actually a very pro-gun piece.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if you read it and you really think deeply about what they're saying, they're like, well, shit, everybody should be armed, especially minorities.
And, yes. And, that's kind of my perspective. Growing up, my parents are a little bit older than a lot of folks my age. My father, unfortunately, passed last year, but he'd been a police officer from 1962 to 1994. And, he saw a lot of change in the department. I mean, when he went on in 1962, he wasn't allowed. He ultimately was allowed, but initially, one of the sergeants told him not to sit with his graduating class.
Really?
Yeah. Fortunately, a Captain Caldwell, who later became Chief Caldwell, was like, no, you need to go down there and sit with your class. So you had a very forward-thinking chief for that time period, or captain for that time period, who eventually became chief. And, it was really interesting to hear stories about Chief Caldwell from my dad, because that was his favorite police chief. And I grew up under Lee Brown and some of the knuckleheads that have come along since then. And
there's been a few.
Yeah. And Dad never had the appreciation for those folks that he had for Chief Caldwell. So that to me spoke volumes.
See, and I think that also touches on another thing, which is the current tension. And I guess this leads us down a lot of roads. That
a rabbit hole?
Yeah, a rabbit hole. Shockingly, there's the name. So I guess that divide, and you have a very unique perspective on both race and the police, having grown up with a father and having grown up. Now you grew up in Third Ward, right?
Actually, a little neighborhood called Pleasantville that's outside on the east end of town. So, but I spent a lot of time in both Third Ward and Fifth Ward.
Okay.
There was a teen organization I was in. We met in Third Ward like basically every weekend or at least once a month, and I got my hair cut in Fifth Ward. So, so yeah, I spent a lot of time in those communities.
So when I think for you, that gives you a lot more perspective, as I was joking about at the beginning. I mean, I am a lily white. I have absolutely no perspective on this. And it's funny because so my wife is Asian, or of Asian descent, I should say. She gets mad at me when I say she's Asian because she's like, no, I'm a Texan, damn it. And so for me, it's like, it's weird. We'll be somewhere and she'll say, well, people are looking at us. And I'm like, what are you talking about? She's like, well, we're an interracial couple. And it's funny, every time she says that, I don't think about it, but and I just tease her. I'm like, they're just, you're stunning. They're just looking at you. And she still isn't buying that line.
Well, they may be.
But they may be. She's a very beautiful woman, so they may be. But I guess for me, I have no perspective. So that's why it's so great to be able to sit, and as we were talking about before, to have these hard conversations of what goes on with police, like where people are very mad about these shootings and not even to play the statistics game of who gets shot more or anything like that, because that becomes
I as I was saying before, my problem is that we've got two groups of people that are talking at each other, not to each other. And there are valid concerns on both sides. And one of my problems is that both sides undermine their own points of view. And I'll start with the Black Lives Matter side. And I'm not a member of Black Lives Matter. I'm not the guy to walk down the street to say that anybody's life matters. There are 7 billion people on this planet. If we say goodbye to a few of them, I'm not hurt. That said, I have lived through, and fortunately, I don't run into a whole lot of it. It's not something that happens daily to me. and some of that's lifestyle and not necessarily fitting an easy mold and all of that. But I have certainly had my share of horrible traffic stops and horrible interactions with law enforcement. And at the same time, having the perspective of my dad, one of the earliest stops I had, my father's question was, well, what did you do to cause the officer to act the way he did? So dad's perspective was very much that of he's a cop first, and recognizing something that he was famous for saying was that people know just enough about their rights to go to jail. And he was an old school cop. I mean, as we're sitting here talking, I'm literally looking at his old hickory stick. So he was one of the hickory shampoo generation of cops. Yeah. And, for those who don't know what that means, it's beat, rinse, repeat until you act appropriately. And, but the thing is as I got older, I understood what he meant. And I've seen unfortunately, I watch videos where I see people take themselves down a road that is going to get ugly. There was a video very recently of a Sweeney PD arrest here in Texas. And I've forgotten the guy's name, but it's an arrest over apparently an assault or disturbing the peace. And it starts out with them just trying to investigate it. And the guy is mouthing off. And it's not that I'm saying that one needs to be beholding to the police and act as if as if you need to kiss their boots or something like that. But there is just a simple respect for another human being that this guy wasn't displaying. When they were saying, hey, just will you calm down? Let's talk to us. His default answer was, fuck you. And then you see him challenging the officers, charging the officers and then backing off and then calling his dog and backing off. And, as a police officer, or if I were a police officer, I could see where I'd go, okay, we can't keep playing this game. We need to resolve this problem. And yet you keep, jumping in here like you want to start a fight. And so eventually they gave him what he wanted. And it was actually a relatively peaceful arrest. He got tased, he got put on the ground, and he was largely arrested without incident. Yet, I know a lot of folks who share that video and go, see, this is an indication of police brutality. And I'm like, no, he didn't get beat. He got tased, but he bought that ride. So when we talk about people who are undermining their argument, when you look at something like that, where it's clearly the officers were not cussing at him, they weren't throwing any sort of racial epithets at him, they weren't even using force against him until he used force against them. That was actually police officers being professional, doing what they're supposed to do. And I don't think any of us should have a problem with police officers doing that. And then we look at cases like the Alton Sterling case. And that's one of those times where, when the Black Lives Matter group goes off, I'm like, that's not murder. It's horrible. It's a bad shooting to watch. But it's kind of like sausage. When you see sausage made, it's ugly. And so watching the Alton Sterling case, I'm watching, that video, the very first video that got released, starts with him getting tased, I believe it was twice within 15 seconds. The whole time the officer's saying, get on the ground, get on the ground. Now, we don't get to see, as is typically the case, what led up to that. Yeah. But my thought is, in fact, a friend of mine who is a police officer watched that video and goes, well, why don't either of these guys have guns out? And I'm thinking to myself, that might be because they're good cops, the kind that we all would want, who probably initially approached this guy saying, hey, dude, let me talk to you for a minute. And we don't see the video until it gets to, okay, he's not going to talk to us. He's walking away from us. And I'm sorry, if it's a call for a man with a gun who has pointed a gun at somebody, that's aggravated assault in Texas. A cop can't just go, I'll pick you up next week for that. He can't walk away. He can't lose. And so the officers are in a place where they can't back down. And unfortunately, this guy keeps pushing things he's had multiple opportunities to give this up. He's had the opportunity to comply with the first taser, doesn't do it. Gets tased the second time, doesn't do it. Gets put on the ground, could say, okay, I give up, doesn't do it. And then when an officer screams, hey, he's got a gun, that has elevated things to a very different level than it's no longer a discussion at that point. And once those officers realize they can't control him, do I wish that the tasers had worked? Do I wish that they'd been able to talk to him? Sure. I wish all of those things had worked. But he decided that he wasn't going to comply with that. And that ultimately led to his death. He is responsible for his own death in that regard. So I don't think that I can't watch that and then go, oh, they killed a black man for selling CDs. That's not what happened. They killed a man because he had a gun in his pocket. He kept resisting and wouldn't quit fighting.
Mm-hmm.
And what is the police officer supposed to do? Wait until he gets shot and then go, oh, I've been shot. Let me shoot back. No, that's stupid.
Yeah. Yeah, and I don't think anyone would expect anyone else to do that. Like, hey, let me wait. Well, I mean, there are people in this world, unfortunately, that would say, well, you need to be shot first, or you should just let yourself get shot.
Right.
But there's those people. Yeah.
And but then we look at the other side of it. We look at incidents like, and the one that jumps to mind is Walter Scott. He was not a police officer. He was I don't want to say gentleman. He was a guy who got pulled over in South Carolina, I believe, for a broken tail light. Now, that's the oldest excuse in the book, but
right.
He did run at some point in time, and that is bad. That doesn't justify shooting somebody. He ends up in a fight with a police officer by the name of Michael Schlager, I believe was his guy's name, and someone catches that fight on video. We see enough of that fight that Scott knocks the taser out of Schlager's hand, beats feet, and runs. And Schlager, for whatever reason, decided, well, he's running away, so I'm going to shoot him. So he's got a suspect who's about 10 or 15 yards away, running away, arms and feet moving. And, so he's clearly looking at this guy's back before the Schlager gets on his gun and shoots the guy in the back as he's running away. One of my problems is on the law enforcement side, the number of police officers who look at that and immediately jump to the police officer's defense and I'll even accept, well, let's see all the facts, but I'll accept that. But then once all the facts are there, you're still looking for a way to defend it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so, that's bad enough, but then we have to look at this in the context of what is the history of law enforcement in this country, particularly in this situation with relation to black folks. Mm-hmm. It doesn't take long to find old news clips of police officers sicking dogs on black people that are in peaceful protests, not the kind of riots that we see today, but in peaceful protests. It doesn't take long to find news clips of police, breaking out the water hose and shooting people across the street, and literally skipping folks down the street with a fire hose. And, you'll even hear officers today who laugh about that and go, oh, wow, really wish we could use a fire hose today, and never think about the implication that comes with that.
Yeah.
And so those are, that is the sort of thing where with the Michael Schlagers of the world, or in the case of Oscar Grant, who was killed quite accidentally on a BART platform a few years ago. He's being arrested. It's a lawful arrest. I don't argue with any of that. But what happens is the officer that's arresting him gets interrupted in his thought process, pulls out, thinking he's going to pull out a taser, and shoots the guy in the back with a 40 caliber pistol. And you can see him go, oh crap, as he puts his hands to his face, realizing he's heard a pop instead of,
a buzz. Yeah.
Again, you had police officers who went, the guy shouldn't have resisted. I'm like, that's
no.
So you're saying that this guy, the fact that this guy was basically negligently killed doesn't matter. And so that's where the Black Lives Matter thing got started. Now, I'll admit there are some people who are involved in the organization that are just plain scum. There's no denying that. But I do not think, I think that that's one of those cases where the majority of people who are involved don't realize that, or they believe that the bigger picture is what's more important. Kind of like the guys who might be anti-abortion and then think nothing of blowing up an abortion clinic.
Yeah, kind of negating the point they were trying to make in the beginning, that all life is important and worth keeping. Yeah.
And so, like I said, I'm neither the Black Lives Matter type guy. I'm not necessarily Blue Lives Matter, but I think when I say all lives matter, I'm not doing it to diminish anything.
Right.
Unfortunately, what I see when we look at the all lives matter crowd is a tendency to diminish everything else.
Do you think it's a diminishment because it's an immediate reaction to people saying Black Lives Matter, and there's actually a listener that made this point to me like an hour ago, which was that it's not that they have a problem with all lives matter. It's more of, hey, I just said something and you're not listening. All you're doing is talking at me.
Right. Which is where we come
All
back
you're
to.
doing is responding. Yeah.
That's where we come back to with all sides, to me, is that we're coming back to everyone talking at each other and never listening to each other.
Yeah.
And, and I guess if you want to say that I'm part of anything, I might say all lives matter, but only in the sense that when I look at Black Lives Matter, the people that I know that are involved in it, and when I look at it, I think that it's hey, our lives matter too, not our lives matter to the exclusion of everything else.
And that was going to be my question, because as I kept hearing, and do still keep hearing, Black Lives Matter, I go, okay, well, yeah, well, and then my reaction is to say, well, all life matter, but then I go, okay, wait, but then the Black Lives Matter get mad that somebody says all lives matter, and I'm like, okay, wait, I can't imagine. I mean, I can imagine, but I don't think that's definitely a minority of people that would think that Black lives matter to the exclusion of all other lives. So I look at it and say, okay, where is the disconnect? Where is the messaging? You can tell I'm in marketing. Where is the messaging disconnect?
Right.
Where the two sides don't hear each other? And that's my question is, did somebody just forget to put Black Lives Matter, the word "to" on the end of that, or also on the end of that, to say, hey, look, we are either being discounted or we are experiencing that we are discounted. Either way, at the end of the day, that is their, whether it's real or not.
Right. Well, it's
setting that aside for a moment, that's the experience. That's the reality for them.
I think that the experience boils down to, and we always talk about how perception is more important than reality. So from if you look at it in the marketing perspective, then that's the issue, is that the perception is that within our country that those lives do not matter. Like I said, we come back to the automatic jump to defense of clear wrongdoing. We know that there are, HPD, as an example, probably has 2 to 3 million contacts with people throughout the course of a year. If you look at the number of officers they have and the number of people that we have, in the city, a minimum of 3 to 4 million contacts that they probably make in any given point in the year. And I would guess that 99.99% of those go off without a hitch. I've certainly had plenty of contact with HPD, because when I got my Raptor, I got stopped 12 times in a year. So
really,
but
so now was this because you were having fun with the Raptor and being a little? I mean, like, you have a gigantic foot, so I could totally see how you might accidentally.
A size 15 foot does not rest easy on a gas pedal. However, the interesting thing about the Raptor is it's just a big truck, and it attracts attention no matter what. And it's interesting. I'll get pulled over for being 1 mile over in the Raptor and do 120 in the Mustang, and nobody blinks. So now I could argue that's because the Mustang's white and the Raptor's black, but but the vast majority, I mean, all of those stops were really uneventful. The stop that still sticks out in my mind is when I was like 16 years old, and this was, like I said, we're talking almost 20 years ago now. You are actually more than 20 years ago. Shoot, I'm getting old. But it was 20 years ago, and the police officer that pulled me over was just some random dude, Smith, that worked Northeast Patrol back then. He told me that he pulled me over because my car matched the description of a burglary suspect. And that was what he told me. Now, I've never found a report to verify that at all. But at some point in time, Smith tells me to get out of the car. And I said, well, that's fine. I didn't resist that at all, because I'd grown up the son of a cop and I did what I was told. And I said, if there's any confusion here, I'm more than happy to call my dad, or we can, I'm sure we can get somebody through dispatch to get a hold of him. Because he works HPD. And this guy's response at the time was, well, you go ahead and call him. I have no problem with you calling him. I'll happily have 2 dead niggers on the side of the road here.
Whoa.
So that was one of my first not so good experiences with a police officer. He said that, didn't flinch, didn't care. And I just said, okay, well, I realize how this is going to go. So I sat happily, let him pee on my head, and moved on. He left me on the side of the road, having basically cut open the seats in my car and pulled my stereo out. I had a little pull-out stereo, threw that on the ground, and opened my backpack and emptied the contents on the ground and left me on the side of the road. After he was,
what a wonderful human
satisfied
being.
that I didn't have anything for him to arrest me for.
Uh,
So, when I asked my dad about that, his response at the time was, "What did you do to cause him to react that way?" So my view was, doesn't matter. That's just the way cops are, and whatever they do is how you roll. But when you see that sort of thing, and the general reaction is, well, you must have done something to justify it. You must have done something to deserve it. And that even when you clearly didn't, well, that's just, police officers being police officers. That's okay. That is where the perception that apparently my life doesn't matter comes from.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I don't know that there's an easy answer to fix that. When discussed today, the reaction is amongst police officers, well, that was 20 years ago. Like, well, okay, that was 20 years ago. It's also an easy 20 years past, 30 years past the Civil Rights Act of the 60s. And yet it still happened. And yet it's still considered reasonable. And so if you have that sort of thing, or the worst part is people go, well, that just didn't happen.
Yeah. Yeah, just flat out denial.
Yeah. So those are the things that I think is what creates that perception that led folks to the Black Lives Matter mantra and mindset. But yeah, there's a marketing issue of I think the vast majority are saying, hey, our lives matter too. Why can't we correct this? Why can't we address this? And what can we do to fix it? Now, none of that, to me, justifies the crap that we have seen in Baton Rouge, Dallas, San Diego, or any number of places where police officers have been outright assassinated. That is plainly wrong. You do not right two wrongs with, you don't make a right with two wrongs.
So does this, and since you have a close connection to a lot of officers, has this compounded the issue with those officers and made them even more nervous? And maybe heated the situation up more from them, or are they backing off saying, I think
you're going to see. I think it really depends on the individual, and I think it also depends on the leadership of the agency. I look at the chief in Dallas as being, police officers have this saying of a policeman's policeman, and that is what I see in that police chief, where he's like, look, this. Clearly he's a black man, but he also represents the people of Dallas, not the black people of Dallas, not the white people of Dallas, but the people of Dallas. And so his priority is to protect everyone. And that is the leadership role that he has taken with his department. Now, there are some officers within his department that go, no. That's the corrections we've had with our department are just from doing body cameras and reinforcing that when we say things that we're right. I think that there's some truth to that, but I think that there's also the fact that he's made use of force policies very clear and try to make it open. And it's not just him. I mean, that's also the city government saying, okay, let's be open about what happens in a review of our use of force policies. Let's not make it this black box where it just happens and you just get the result you get. So, I'm not going to take the president's stance of saying, well, police need to admit to their failures. I don't think of law enforcement as a whole as a failure. I think that it can be argued that it is necessary for a peaceful society, because otherwise we have the days of the rich guys just hiring their little posse of folks to go look for somebody or beat someone up. So law enforcement certainly has a place in that regard. But to have an honest discussion, to be able as a police officer to say when a police officer screws up and be able to honestly say that. And right now, the culture is such that doesn't happen.
Yeah, it's kind of sad to see. I mean, even there was an instant, I think it was it came, the news report, I think, came out last week about an HPD SWAT team thing where they came in. And the guy was white, but apparently it went on for a year, and they flashbanged this guy while he was passed out drunk in his own bathtub or something. And like they flashbanged him twice and shot him in the back of the neck with the taser and all this other stuff. And he's like basically everybody, he's gone through the entire court system and everybody said, yeah, this was all bad. It shouldn't have happened. But they kept trying to, it appears at this point, I should say, that a lot of people were trying very hard to sweep the whole thing under the rug from their side.
Yeah. Well, and then you had the incident where they had and I'm back to, I wasn't there, but it just doesn't sound good. You had I believe he was a quadriplegic, or no, he was a paraplegic who only had one good arm and one good leg or something. Somehow this was a disabled person who only had one operational arm and one operational leg. And a police officer believed him to be a significant enough threat to his partner that he was shot in a wheelchair. And that's one of those, I'm trying to figure that one out. If you've only got one good leg, you're not really fast, and you've only got one good arm, and you didn't have a gun in your hand, it's pretty hard to imagine what situation you could reach someone to be a significant enough threat to require getting shot.
Yeah.
But it was
maybe it was a tactical wheelchair. I don't know.
I guess, but it was considered reasonable and justified, and nothing ever came of it. And that's one of those things where there may be a very weird set of scenarios that say that was a completely justifiable shooting and it was necessary. And if you can do that, if you can show me that argument, I'm willing to listen. But this is where the body cams come in and say, maybe we should have body cameras to either reinforce the officer's statement or potentially contradict it. And the funny thing is, when I was growing up, when they first talked about that with dash cams, police officers went, no, we don't want dash cams. Why not? Well, it invades the officer's privacy, or it proves the officer's statement. But the vast majority went, no, it invades our privacy. And you see the exact same argument right now with the body cams. Now, if you want to talk about reasonable statements about issues with the body cams, limits on battery life, the fact they get knocked off in a fight and all that kind of jazz, those are reasonable statements to me. That's a completely logical argument to me. But the privacy,
but that's also a limitation of everything. I mean, you could make the same kind of argument about them having a gun, period. Like, hey, you guys could make the situation even worse by introducing your own gun, like the presence of a gun in a situation that may not have had a gun. So, I mean, that's
the claim of gun control, right? That's why we're not supposed to have a gun. But
to be clear, I was not making the argument that officers shouldn't. I'm just, people making silly arguments.
Yes, that's one of the silly arguments that would come up. And most of us, most police officers in this country would not be willing to be a police officer without a gun, and I don't blame them. My issue is I'd like to be able to have one too.
Exactly.
So, and it's not that I face all the same issues. I don't have to go get into things. I'm not, paid to win, but there are situations that may come up that I need to defend myself, or at least make sure I get home. And I'd like to have the option to do that through whatever means is necessary. So to me, that's reasonable. But we do have folks who think, like you just said, their argument is, well, that will escalate things. If things are bad enough that I'm considering a gun, they've already gotten escalated.
Yes, they've already gone there. Here's a very hard question. How does one side hear the other side in this conversation? So if somebody says Black Lives Matter, and for the rest of the discussion, we just assume that they're actually saying Black Lives Matter too, how do they get heard?
Well, I think on both sides, you have to be willing to listen. And that's, I think, we've jokingly said that on Guns Over Texas the last couple of episodes that, you got three guys who are trying to be reasonable about it and have a reasonable discussion, but they're stuck in a closet together. They're not out having that discussion with other people. And I think that is the issue. You and I are having that discussion. And, I think of that, what was the line in, I think it was Men in Black. Will Smith is like, why don't you just tell people this? And Tommy Lee Jones's retort is, with an individuals can be smart and reasonable and, have logical discussions about things, but people are panicky, just ignorant idiots.
Yes, they are, especially in groups.
Yeah. And so that's part of our issue is that on both sides, and neither one would admit to this, is that it boils down to a mob mentality, whether it be police lives matter. And like I said, I think that they do. I think that Black Lives Matter. I do think that all lives matter. But I don't offer all lives matter as an immediate retort to say your movement is full of shit and it doesn't matter. My life matters, and that's all there is to it. It is simply acknowledging, wait a minute, why do you think this way? What is it that has led you to this conclusion? And have a discussion about that. And people aren't willing to do that on either side of the table, as I see it. I did see a very interesting video with, I think it was a guy named Van Jones and Newt Gingrich, where they were discussing Black Lives Matter and the attacks on police. And shockingly, to hear from Newt Gingrich to say, the reality is people just know what it's like to be black in America. And I was shocked to hear that from him, of all people.
Mm-hmm.
Because I do think that now, obviously, it's my perspective. I'm a black guy. I have a different experience from other people. I don't think that it's a better experience, a poor experience. It's just different. But I acknowledge that. And I acknowledge that my friends, be they white, Hispanic, whatever, have a unique experience. That's one of the things that makes America, to me, one of the greatest countries on earth, is that it's not a homogenous society as so much of the rest of the world was for so long until very recently. You could go to Japan 20 years ago, and if you might see a rare American or European, but for the most part, it was a lack of a better way to say it, a lily white island set of islands, and everybody there was Japanese. And Germany, for a very long time, everybody there was German. And so that has changed, and unfortunately, we're seeing some friction as a result of that. Germany is having mass attacks, and France is seeing mass attacks. And I don't think that it boils down to color. It boils down to people not talking. Now, some of that is just pure extremism, clearly.
Yeah.
The attacks and that sort of thing are clear extremism. And there is clearly an issue where you have a group of people within a religion who are stuck in the 15th century. And I don't know that any amount of talking to them is going to fix that.
Yeah.
So there are times to recognize that talking simply isn't going to help. But before we get there, which is, I don't think that we're there yet in America. Before we get there, there needs to be an honest, okay, why do you think the way you think? Just as we're having this discussion now. And when that person explains that to you, rather than simply scoffing and saying that, no, that just can't be, look into whether or not there's validity to it. It's a simple, human desire to be recognized, to be heard, and for that to be validated, I guess.
No, I think it's not. I think I think you put it perfectly there. I think you put it better than just about anyone else I've ever heard put it. And that leads me to my next question. Where is this going? Is it, and as somebody who is switched on, where do you see this going? Is it going to get worse? Is it going to go away again? Like after the Rodney King riots, it kind of died off for a long time.
I think it depends on what the media, unfortunately, I hate to say it, but I think that the media has a big role in this. And it really depends on how they want to play it. And not only that, and the scary part is there's two ways they can play it. One is to simply bury it. The other is to keep stoking the fire. But I'd like to see them take a third route, which is doing what we're doing, which is having real discussions and not just putting forth the usual talking heads that are already entrenched into their little camps. It doesn't need to be a town hall. I don't want to see another town hall from the president. I don't want to see, I don't want to see a town hall with Bill O'Reilly. I don't want to see Bill Maher or I just want to see real people sit down. If you drink beer, have a discussion about it, but have an honest discussion and don't completely discount each other, and don't look at each other as being, well, you're so-and-so, so you just don't get it. They might not get it. That's part of the problem. We clearly don't get it. So let's have a discussion so that we can get it. What is it? And I keep saying that. It's going to keep coming down to that. It is all of us recognizing each other and listening to each other and saying, okay, I hear you. I get where you're coming from. Even if I don't necessarily get where you're coming from, I understand that you have a valid concern. What can we do to fix that? And, and I'm not saying that actually I could do without most of what police have been pushed to. The Dallas police chief said something that I think resonated with almost every cop I know, which was police are asked to do entirely too many things. Police should not be settling every domestic dispute that you have with your child. They should not be settling every domestic dispute you have with your significant other. They should not be providing discipline to your child in the school. These are things that law enforcement is not supposed to do. And if your cousin Freddie is batshit nuts and crazy and schizophrenic and off his meds, again, law enforcement is probably not best suited to deal with that.
Yeah, that's not who you want to call when that goes down, because that's probably only going to end up one way,
right?
With few exceptions.
I mean, that's literally like asking Marines to hand out food. They're in the business of killing people. That's what they do. Yes, occasionally you get some guys who really want to hand out toys and they're being really nice about it. But at the end of the day, they're riflemen first. That's what they do. They blow stuff up and kill people. So you don't have them hand out food.
Yeah. Well, shit, man, it is so good to finally talk to you. I know you've got a hard out here, and I would love to monopolize your time. I'm not going to do that today. So what's the fast story with Guns Over Texas? One of my favorite podcasts. And I'm always sad when you guys aren't on. So when you guys aren't in the closet, yes. I'm feeling disconnected because I don't want to listen to myself talk. I do that enough as it is. So what's going on with y'all's schedule? When are y'all going to be back on a regular thing here?
We should be back in about 2 weeks to record again, and we'll see what our schedules hold. All of us are rather busy these days. Jeff managed to make the news nationally when his range, Shiloh, put out basically an all-points bulletin offering to do CHL classes for the gay and lesbian community in response to the attack in Orlando. And he seemed to manage to get the ire of Facebook as a result of that, and his page got shut down.
I saw that. Yeah.
But things are percolating quite well. They've had to suspend that program because they just had so huge a response that they.
Yeah, I heard it was like he was booked up for like 3 or 4 weeks or something insane.
Yeah, over 600 people, if I remember correctly, that responded to that. Yeah, which for a small range is huge.
Awesome. I mean, just what he did was freaking awesome. Yeah. I mean, he sounds like Archie Bunker on the show, which is kind of fun.
Right.
But he's a super cool guy.
Yeah.
I mean, that was an amazing thing he did. And I guess when you hear him and think of him as this kind of Archie Bunker character,
right.
Even I, like, knowing a little bit better than that, I was kind of blown away. I was like, dude, that was a really freaking cool thing to do.
It was. And we were glad to see it. And, I've always wanted to just spread the sunshine. So, I make an effort, and it sounds cliche, but I make an effort to bring more blacks or African Americans, however they want to refer to themselves, or us, and bring them into the fold, because that's, as I see it, people are being brainwashed by not just the Democratic Party, but our society into thinking that, they shouldn't have the right to defend themselves. And the reality is, especially anyone who lived through Jim Crow, up through the 1970s, if you live through that, then there's a good chance the reason you're here is because your parents or grandparents had the right to keep and bear arms and exercised it. That's reality. And I don't ever want to give that up, because as much as the pendulum may swing one way at any given point in time to benefit one particular group or another, it can always swing the other way. And, you may be reduced to defending your life against a tyrannical government. That could happen. And I don't ever want to see us get back to that. But like I said, the group's going to be back. Hopefully we'll be recording again in 2 weeks. We'll see what schedules pop up. We're looking at getting, we've looked at Zencastr and some other technologies to let us record when we're separated from each other. But that's just been a challenge just because of our respective schedules. So, but we're looking to try to, get back on the horse and get everything rolling on a regular basis again very soon.
Awesome. I am glad to hear that, because I love listening to y'all.
Well, we appreciate it.
All right, Gary of Guns Over Texas Radio. Dude, awesome as always to have you on. We'll have to get you on again this season. And I don't know, blow something up or talk about some other things of exciting nature. And dude, it was good talking to you as always.
Indeed. Definitely enjoyed it. Thanks again.
Be sure to check out Gary's podcast, Guns Over Texas Radio, by visiting gunsovertexasradio.com. As always, Show notes, resources, and other fun stuff from this episode can be found at intherabbithole.com/E177. And hey, if you are not subscribed to this show, be sure to hit iTunes, search for intherabbithole.com, and subscribe to it today. And with that, we wrap up episode number 177 from the Lone Star State. Till next time, stay safe and sound.